Welcome. My name is Norman Stockwell with the Progressive Magazine, and here with me, John Shipton, the father of Julian Assange, and Gabriel Shipton, Julian Assange's half-brother. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Norman.
You folks are traveling around the country right now talking about the case of Julian Assange, and I want to start by talking about that case because it's really a First Amendment case. And the two of you are Australians. Julian Assange is also an Australian, and yet what we're talking about here is an essential precept of law here in the United States, something that's been part of our Constitution for more than 200 years, and the protections of freedom of the press in the Bill of Rights. Why is this case, the case of Julian Assange, important to us in terms of press freedom?
Well, the first one to recognize its vitality globally was James Goodall, who's the lawyer for the New York Times back in Pentagon Papers Day, and he made the observation that it's of global importance. I guess for three reasons. The first one is that the intimidation and oppression of journalists, publishers, in commenting upon national security matters is a profound deficit to the quality of understanding and conversation in the polity of the Western world. That is, one. The next one is, of course, that the arbitrary detention of Julian and the malice that has been used and the conspiracy between the Swedish prosecuting authority and the Crown Prosecuting Service, all documented, by the way, FOIs from their files, all documented from their files, I make that point very strongly, is a malice that is aimed at ensuring that nobody is tempted ever again to make the revelations that Julian made, or set up an analysis on a wiki that everybody can access and consequently make sound views of government policy and also make suggestions to government policy that this policy is followed or not to be followed. This collapse in the quality of conversation reverberates, or reticulates, a better word, reticulates back into government, and as a consequence of that, governance weakens and states become anxious, as they are now in the United States and the United Kingdom and Australia. The level of anxiety in those states you can measure by the further application of laws compressing comment. So it is a reticulation of oppression, needing further oppression because the quality of government and its understanding declines. So that's three reasons that I can give here.
Mm-hmm. And I want to come back to talk about some of the things that came out through the WikiLeaks releases over the years, but let's talk for a moment about the current status of Julian Assange. He's in prison right now in the United Kingdom, and Gabriel, tell us a little bit about the situation of your brother in that prison. What's his current health situation, and how has his experience there been?
He's been it's his third year now in maximum security Belmarsh prison on the outskirts of London. He's suffering, in that prison. It's under a COVID lockdown, so not much time outside of your cell. He hadn't had any visits for 8 months, so since October. There was some good news yesterday that Stella, his partner, and children were able to go and visit him for the first time in 8 months. He's been there. He won his extradition case January 4th, the judge rejected the extradition on the basis that the conditions in the US were oppressive and would likely lead to his suicide. And then a few days later, the judge rejected bail, so sent him back to the prison. Since then, it's been 6 months, and he doesn't know when the US government appealed the extradition, and so he doesn't know when the appeal will take place or if it will take place. So, it's just another abusive process that has been levelled against Julian it's all sort of adding up over the last 12 years since he was put under house arrest.
And let's talk about that trajectory, that 12-year trajectory. Now, the original charges that he was put under house arrest in the UK for had nothing to do with WikiLeaks.
No, so there were no charges. There was an investigation, an investigation launched by Sweden that was basically used to keep him, to detain him. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, I think in 2016, was that in 2016? They found 2017 that Julian had been arbitrarily detained. So the UN Working Group found that all the investigation in Sweden was being used to arbitrarily detain Julian to, remove his liberty.
So, but the investigation in Sweden was about sexual assault charges, not about WikiLeaks.
Yeah, no, it wasn't about WikiLeaks. It was
not about charges.
Yeah, it was an investigation. So
okay.
There was
into allegations.
Yeah. So
allegations.
Yeah, and through that whole process, it was opened, it was closed again, reopened. There's all these irregularities in that case, which is why the UN Working Group found that it was being used to arbitrarily detain Julian rather than an actual investigation.
But then for these allegations, he turned himself in to the British authorities initially, right, in 2012.
Yes, so he didn't leave. He only left Sweden when he was given permission to leave. So he offered to stay in Sweden to go and answer questions, etc. So he then went to the UK, and that's where it all sort of started unfolding. But the prosecutor in 2019 they dropped the case. They had found that they didn't have any evidence to proceed with the investigation. That sort of has all fallen away now, and what Julian was concerned with the whole time was this sealed indictment, which he was been talking about it for 10 years, and now here it is. The indictment's now unsealed, and the prosecution of Julian under the Espionage Act is proceeding.
Right. So that's where we come to today. Is the United States is trying to extradite Julian Assange from the UK for charges in an Espionage Act case that has to do with WikiLeaks. So let's talk about WikiLeaks, and what did WikiLeaks do that made the United States government charge Julian Assange under the World War I era Espionage Act?
Well, this is a fabulous question. Two things, both of them vital. One is that Julian established a wiki, which at the time Julian told me about. I didn't know what a wiki was, but he established a wiki whereby it held a library of leaks and documents. Let's say just documents, because some of the documents that are now on the WikiLeaks D plus site releases from the United States after the 30-year period were assembled on the WikiLeaks site in a searchable form. So there's 45 years of searchable diplomatic cables from the United States. So anybody can go and search there and become informed and form analysis with friends or with professional groups of the direction of foreign policy of the United States or the activities of corporations. This is really important. We can become educated to the extent that the people who are constructing policy and enacting policy are. We can run parallel to them in the depth of our understanding. And this, in my understanding, was the prime essentiality of the WikiLeaks, that it held a library, searchable in detail, and enabling all groups all around the world who could get access to a computer. Back in those days when it first started, 60 million people had access worldwide. Now it must be a few hundred million can get access, make an opinion, formulate an opinion, and the benefit to government is this, that it shows where they're running off the tracks or drifting or into barbarity. And that's important to government because governments are ideological and are self-concerned with their own, outlooks or ideology. So they need feedback as to the quality and direction and acceptability, and this it provides it. It's really important. This is the fundamental aspect of the First Amendment of the United States, which every country in the Western world envies and tries to adopt. It's a fundamental aspect. Jefferson said, I'd rather have no state and newspapers than a state without newspapers. Really important. The next one is the protection of people who bring information to WikiLeaks and wish to remain anonymous. This is really important, and Julian's understanding of how Tor works and how to protect a source. Now, every major news outlet in the world has a drop box, and those drop boxes were designed by Julian and a really brilliant American computer, what would you call, IT expert, a really brilliant man who committed suicide at the age of 26 some years ago. His name, won't come to mind at the moment, invented Reddit as well. So that combination of intelligence provided anybody who wished to remain anonymous but found information that required publishing to do so and submit to WikiLeaks, and it would be there. And WikiLeaks had a skill in perfecting the method of ensuring that the information that they published had complete integrity, no falsities. All the documents were sourced to the accuracy. So that combination of 1, 2, 3 allows the government to see that this is something that they may not want. Although, I make this point very strongly, although the First Amendment, and the reasons for it being there, says to government that the quality of government will improve with an educated polity. Despite that, they attempt to oppress WikiLeaks. It's very short term and really just a response of animus from certain groups in the Washington, like certain part of the CIA, not the analytics section, certain parts of the State Department surrounding Mrs. Clinton when she was in power, and certain parts of the White House who felt that it was embarrassing.
Now, you talk about these leaks or revelations, as you've called them. They come from, for the most part, what I would say is whistleblowers, people who are giving information to WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks, and by the way, of course, in the States, besides the First Amendment, we also have a Whistleblower Protection Act, which is as old as the U.S. Constitution. But the role that WikiLeaks has played is as a publisher of this information. So talk about that a little bit, Gabriel, if you could, about the things that WikiLeaks has published that have served, as your father described, to inform the public about the actions of government.
So I guess the ones that Julian has currently been pursued for publishing, the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs, Guantanamo Bay detainee files. The Iraq and Afghan war logs showed how the military was operating in those countries, and has led to the end of the Iraq war. The Afghan war logs, the current policy is now to withdraw. US policy is to withdraw from Afghanistan. Guantanamo Bay, the current policy is now to close Guantanamo Bay. So all these things that Julian is currently charged, is being pursued for, have led to policy change here in the US. So that's
because of their exposure.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So there's this sort of disconnect between, we're going to pursue this person for making policies for exposing all these things that have led us to better our policies here. There was also, 2017 they published Vault 7, which was a big, how the CIA, what different tools that the CIA used to spy on people and things like that. So surveillance. But yeah, there's literally thousands of stories broken by Julian over the years in WikiLeaks.
And another one that you didn't mention, but the Cablegate, all of the release of the State Department cables, which led in many ways to the beginning of the Arab Spring in Tunisia.
Yes, yeah. The population in Tunisia were able to see that the government there wasn't being supported by the US, and so they it gave them the confidence to rise up and change what was a very bad, corrupt regime there, and arguably that kicked off everything else in the Arab Spring. So yeah, it can lead to, like was John saying, it just it educates the population, and they're able to make decisions that concern them and better their environment and better their society.
Now, one of the criticisms that's often raised about WikiLeaks is that it puts people's lives in danger when they release these secret government cables and so on. And John, you talked about the protections that go into publishing this material, and particularly making sure that all these documents are accurate and so on. What's the mechanism that WikiLeaks uses to assure that the information that goes out is what the public needs to see? What's the philosophy, I guess, maybe more than the mechanism?
Well, forgive me, I'll divide the question into two parts. One part, I'll get the chainsaw out, but in the first part is that WikiLeaks with the cables, the diplomatic cables, had 96 media partners, and each of those media partners had expertise in a particular area, and so that enabled the redaction of names. The night of the publication, Saturday night, the publications were coming out Monday. Julian sat up for 24 hours non-stop work and redacted 10,000 names. All the New York Times, the Der Spiegel, the Guardian, the Le Monde reporters, they all went out to dinner and a bottle of wine. He sat up all night. This is documented on film, all night, redacting 10,000 names. For the balance of the procedure, and I was there, witnessed this in Norwich, had their 96 media partners Also, they had 10 people around the round table, very big table, going for, so they had a Brazilian lady who I met, very impressive woman, had read 3,000 cables concerning Brazil and progressively redacted anything that would cause danger to anybody. So that's the logical, sensible procedure. Next I get the chainsaw out. Those executives of the Pentagon and the executives of administration in Australia and the UK who stand up, who manage the destruction over the last 30 years of 13 countries, the creation of Brown University study of 36 million refugees. That's people looking for homes because their societies have been completely destroyed. And according to Gideon Polyer, who's an excess death researcher at Melbourne University, excess deaths in the order of 6 to 7 million over that time. These people stand in a river of blood and death and destruction and say, he endangered lives. It's grotesque. It's beyond comprehension. I don't, I just get a bit worked up and I get the chainsaw out when people say that Julian endangered life. The opposite is conclusively proven. When the collateral murder video was released, Julian and Kristen Hanifson, who's now the editor while Julian is banged up in jail, they decided to go to Baghdad, a city. In those days it was a riot of revolution and murder. And Kristen took his life in his hands and went to establish the names of the 11 people that we saw slaughtered and lay in the gutter and one of the tanks running over the corpse. Tried to give names to those people because it's vital to human beings to name the dead, to commemorate the dead. They weren't able to find them. Those people had disappeared from the book of history, but they were able to speak to the relatives of Nahim and the photographer and the journalist from Reuters, and to relatives of the Good Samaritan who tried to assist the wounded man who was crawling along the gutter. That's the quality of people we're speaking of.
Now, the two of you are traveling across the United States throughout the month of June, and you've been to Miami, New York, Philadelphia, here in Wisconsin. Talk about this campaign for a minute. What are your goals, and why is this such a crucial moment to be having this conversation here in the United States today?
So there's a lot of support groups spread through the US. So we're here, coalescing these groups, getting everyone energized again, just to keep talking about this case, bring it up, bring it up to the surface at this at this time when the Biden administration and the DOJ under Garland are looking at the Trump era prosecutions and reconsidering them. Just recently, Merrick Garland met with the New York Times and CNN and Washington Post to talk about the subpoenas that had been issued to journalists. So there is a moment now when a crucial moment that we feel that they're going back and looking at these sort of cases, and there could be an opportunity for Julian's case to be re-examined, and reverted back to the Obama era DOJ, which found that they couldn't pursue Julian without pursuing the New York Times problem, they called. So there's a moment now where they could just revert back to the Obama admin DOJ. also another element of the tour is just, getting more media, getting all the media talking about it. So we've had quite some success there. John and I have been on, 2 national news programs. We'll do another national news program this week. Since we arrived, there's been over 20 articles written about Julian and his case. So just getting everyone talking about this case again, and getting everyone together, and each place we go, we're asking people just to stand up for their rights, stand up for their First Amendment rights, and talk to their Congress people and tell them that this is something that they care about. They care about their democratic rights, their First Amendment rights, and they want their representatives to do something to help them, to stand up for them too.
So your goal really is to get popular support to pressure U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland to reconsider this extradition attempt.
Yeah, I think I think there's what we're seeing, I think, around the world is there's this renewed call for press freedoms around the world. So one way for Biden to sort of signal that we're serious about press freedoms is to drop what is called has been called by Freedom of the Press Foundation the biggest press freedom case in 50 years. I think the State Department is facing, every time they go and say, to another sort of authoritarian state like China, they face, what I'm starting to call is like the Assange problem. So, they're calling for press freedoms in these authoritarian states, and then, the Foreign Affairs spokesperson for China came back and said, well, what about, you're telling us we get to have a free press, what about Assange? The Russian ambassador to the UK was confronted about Navalny. He says, what about Assange? Aliyev, the Azerbaijani authoritarian leader, was confronted about his press. He tortures journalists. He puts them in prison and tortures them. He was confronted about that, and he said to the interviewer, well, you have no right because of what you're doing to Assange. So there's a real opportunity now for the Biden admin to send a signal that will travel all around the world that press freedom is so important in these countries where people don't have the rights that we have, and I think there's a real opportunity now for that message to be sent.
The website that has been created for this is assangedefense.org/tour, where people can follow your trip. And there's also a hashtag home run for Julian, which I see on the buttons that you're wearing as well. What about the future of WikiLeaks? Now, Julian Assange has been imprisoned in various ways, whether it be under house arrest or while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, or now actually in prison for more than a decade, and for about a decade. And the organization WikiLeaks has continued to operate. What's the future for WikiLeaks if Julian is freed and does not face extradition, and what's the future for WikiLeaks if he remains in prison?
Well, WikiLeaks now is independent of Julian. It has Kristen Hammerson as the editor. What the circumstances are, from personally, I don't know what Julian thinks of Kristen, and I don't have anything to do with WikiLeaks. Personally, I'd like to see Julian have a convalescence of at least whatever it takes, a year, 2 years, and then offer his intelligence and his capacity in another venue. For example, there's probably very few, I suppose in the Russian diplomatic service there are, but very few people in the world who have had so much conversations with high-level people in country after country than Julian over that 10 years. His level of conversation and correspondence, activity, knowledge and contacts would be second to none outside of diplomatic services. So I think that I would like to see some involvement at the level of the United Nations or something like that, because let's say there's a number of them. You've got to grind up a lot of ore to get a bit of gold in human affairs. A table and chairs, one example. It took thousands of years to understand which read on the ground would not get problems. Well, another of those is the First Amendment. It took a couple of thousand years for us to understand the relationship. Percy Blythe Shelley made it very plain. The relationship between freedom and knowledge in Prometheus Unbound. That relationship, also the relationship that Julian could bring in the United Nations and I forgot. So another of those golden things is the United Nations itself, which is a great, magnificent civic construction of the second part of the 20th century, and it holds within its embrace means whereby nations can have discussions with each other and further their interests without reverting to warfare. That's so important. Also, it holds within its embrace the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which can be adjusted. It's a human construction, so it needs work over time to adjusted to embrace other cultures which don't have certain sort of influences on individuality or whatever. So that is a wonderful construction, and I'd like to see a lot of energy and effort and intelligence go into remaking it so that it holds means whereby all the nations on the earth can revitalise their contacts and prefer their interests without warfare. And I think Julian would be very good and maybe even great at that circumstance. That's my feeling. What Julian thinks or what WikiLeaks think.
But he is your son, so you have some both pride and interest.
Gabriel no doubt has his fantasy, but Julian, you no doubt have your fantasy. Well, that's my one.
Well, John Shipton, Gabriel Shipton, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about the case of Julian Assange and your trip around the United States. Again, AssangeDefense.org/tour for more information, and the hashtag home run for Julian to follow on social media. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.